Welcome to the Big Idea podcast, where we focus on food. My name's Andrew Ive. I'm the founder of Big Idea Ventures and your host. We're going to be talking with John and Alireza from Evolved Meats today, a company in Canada working on breakthroughs in the cell-based meat space. So let's get into the conversation, and at the end, by all means, add your questions and comments, or feel free to reach out to me, John, or Alireza. Let's get into it. Hello, how are you? Welcome to the podcast. John, Alireza, how are you guys?
Very well, thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're not going to be shy now, are you, Ali?
Probably. I am usually.
Oh, no. This is going to be one of those podcasts. Okay. So to get started, why don't you guys tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. So we're Evolved Meats. We're a Canadian cultivated meat company. Effectively, we're an enabler in the space. So we have a solution to create scaffold-free, structured, and biomaterial-free products from different cells. So we partner with cultivated meat companies, use their cells in media, and recreate structured products with it.
So Evolved Meats, an enabler to the cell-based meat industry.
Exactly.
Okay, so take us through really simply what you do again, just to make sure everybody's getting it. And when I say everybody, I kind of mean me.
So we partner with different cultivated meat companies. Once they grow their cells, we use a technique called cell sheet engineering, where we have proprietary membranes and processes. We take those cells, we make sheets of muscle, fat, connective tissue, turn those sheets into muscle fibers, and then stack them so you have fully fibrous meat at the end of it from any species.
So, okay, I think I get it. Obviously, people can reach out to you if they've got questions or want follow up on that. What problem are you solving? Why are you doing it?
So for us, when you look at the meat category globally, whole cut meats are the most significant share of meat in general. So our goal is really to recreate cultivated meat that is structurally and biochemically identical to conventional meat. So we really want to recreate meat that is exactly like you would get from an animal, without anything you wouldn't expect in it. And that goes down to like the proteomics and the protein profile, the structure, the flavor, the taste, and everything. So it's a very different proposition than just going for ground meat.
Got it. So that's from a traditional meat perspective. The problem you're solving?
The problem we're solving specifically is when you look at cultivated meat as an industry, the first group of companies all had a number of issues to solve around cells and media. And when we started, Ali's background was actually in regenerative medicine, and he was able to recreate whole tissues. So when we looked at the cultivated meat industry, just given the investments all of the other companies had made in just growing cells and trying to do it cheaply enough, they didn't have an opportunity to really kind of focus on the structuring problem. And that's the exact problem we're solving. We're trying to enable every company to have fully structured products.
Okay, you sort of said in the beginning that they were solving, that there were things they were trying to solve around the media and the structure, but you didn't actually put voice to that. So let's get specific. There's 5, 10, 15, 20 companies who started out before you guys. What were the challenges specifically that they were trying to solve, or what were the challenges they were encountering as they moved forward with their cell-based meat products?
Sure. I'll pass it to Ali because he can tackle it from his side. Yeah.
Okay, so if you look at our competitors, at least from what is available publicly and what we can tell about them, they started with the first problem, which was having enough cells for making that amount of meat that we need to have some sort of effect on the meat consumption in general. You need to have a lot of cells, and that is a big problem because we never in any industry needed to grow cells to that degree, that many cells, starting from the stem cells. that starts from the cells and our ability to grow them in the bioreactors, as well as our capacity to give them the nutrients that they need, which is the cocktail, we call it the media, the culture media. So all of them started with that problem. They started finding the right type of stem cells if we needed to, or they needed to do some modification on the cells to make them appropriate for these applications, and then working on that media formulation to make it cheap enough and make it completely animal free, because at the time it was completely animal based. So that was the problem that they had. And then for making the meat itself, they had to somehow make a product that at least looked like meat. So they needed to use something called scaffolding, which is basically something that we make in the lab or in industrial setups using either plant-based materials or something synthetic. It creates the 3D structure of tissue or mimics the 3D structure of tissue. So that's what they did. They grow the cells on these scaffolds that they were making on themselves, and that is the product that they made. But we believe that is not the right way to actually make a cultivated meat, because cells don't really have those kind of materials around them, those kind of scaffoldings that are made out of plant products or synthetic material. And naturally speaking, in the bodies of animals or even humans, cells have the ability to produce something called extracellular matrix, or ECM for short, that creates the 3D structure of tissue. So when the cells are inside the body, they have that kind of natural ability to create those kind of structures, the 3D structures that we see, in this case, the 3D structure of muscle tissue. But when you take the cells out of the body, they forget how to do that. So what we are doing here is that we give the cells the right environment so they can produce their own ECM, and they are creating, basically, we are creating completely functioning muscle tissue, and not just something that looks and tastes like meat. It's actual muscle tissue, and then it transitions to meat.
Okay, so now I think I get it, and the great thing is I'm the lowest common denominator. I promise everybody on this call. So traditional cell-based meat companies, if there is such a thing, given that it's a 5-year, 10-year invention, they were basically creating boxes or sort of frames, and then they were growing cells on these frames, and they were kind of looking like a regular piece of meat, maybe, kind of, sorta, but they weren't. They weren't sort of really getting to how nature does it, so that it was, so that it was really similar to or identical to traditional meat. From your point of view, the missing piece of the missing part of the equation for that is what you're calling the extracellular matrix, or ECM.
That is correct. Yes.
Wow, this is an unlock for me. I didn't know. I've been on the board for how many, years, months, and I didn't know that. That's crazy. So I guess the question becomes, how tough is it? Does it change cost? Does it change time? Like, bringing this ability into the equation, what does it do? How does it change things?
Okay, so I guess we can start with the definition of meat and how meat is generated and created. So basically, if you look at the animal body, you have the muscle tissue that is completely functioning, and cells are alive and are doing their function, which is generating force. And what happens when we create meat is that we sacrifice the animal, and in the post-mortem conditions, the cells are going to go through the process called necrosis. Basically, to put it very simply, they die and release all of the enzymes that they had inside them, and they needed them for their functions. And when those enzymes are released, those enzymes are going to react with that ECM that we talked about and break it down. And in that process, meat is created. So meat is very different than the muscle tissue that we have. So if you want to actually have a product that is exactly similar to conventional meat, you need to have the ECM and then allow those enzymes to react with it. And if you have a scaffolding, those enzymes are still going to get released from the cells when you stop the culture of the cells in your cell cultivated meat or culture meat process, but they are not going to react with the scaffolding, because we don't really have those kind of plant-based or synthetic materials in our muscle tissues, and our enzymes only react, or the animal's enzymes only react with the molecules that they recognize. So this is basically what we think is very different here. We need to make something that is exactly like meat and not just create the experience of meat. That is basically the difference. In terms of the process, the first step of the process is the same. We still need to grow the cells, But then instead of growing them on the scaffolds and differentiating them to muscle cells, because we only grow stem cells, not muscle cells or fat cells, we make the progenitor cells. So the first step is the same. We grow those stem cells in the bioreactors, but the next step for our competitors or other older companies is to grow these cells on the scaffolds and then differentiate them, which is a process that takes time. It requires certain type of bioprocess. We have simplified the process to just grow the cells, differentiate them, and make them produce their own ECM. So the process is not that complicated. We can even say that we have simplified the process because we have removed a lot of the steps that others require. Like, for example, if you use a scaffold and grow cells on that, you need to create something like blood vessels to deliver the nutrients and the oxygen that the cells need to them directly. With the technique that we have, we are actually bypassing that step of the process. We make these sheets. It's really easy to grow them. And then once the sheets are ready and cells have differentiated and produce their own ECM, we can roll them and stack them. So the process is going to be relatively short, depending on the species that we work with and the cell types that we are using, because we can use, for example, iPSCs and embryonic stem cells, something that is pluripotent, all the way to something that is unipotent or is a progenitor cell. Depending on the cells and the species, the process could be taking like a few days to a few weeks.
Okay, so I'm going to try and unpack what I just heard, and you can tell me, either of you can tell me if I get this right. So traditional meat includes the ECM, the extracellular matrix, and after you kill the animal, basically there's almost like a chemical, or maybe it is actually a chemical reaction where it's reacting with the cell matrix. So the cells are reacting with the cell matrix, and that's ultimately what creates or what is making meat. Exactly. If you're replacing that ECM, that extracellular matrix, with an algae-based structure or some other kind of structure so that it looks right, unfortunately, you're not getting the chemical reactions that you need, and therefore it doesn't create the proper meat that we expect if there's an alternative synthetic or sort of algae-based or whatever it might be scaffold involved, right?
It's exactly right.
You need that reaction. You need that reaction between those two pieces, the cells and the ECM, yes?
That is correct. And this process that you explained right now is called muscle to meat transition, or aging, or even curing.
Got it. I think I got it. I'll pretend I got it. How's that? Now, you guys create a process where these cells create the original or their own ECM, and then they react with it as a kind of following step. So there's not this need to create a fake or synthetic scaffold, and also it has the necessary reaction to have a perfect meat taste, flavor, etc., etc. So what does your process actually equate to in terms of the following sort of criteria? So speed of manufacturing, or speed of production, expense versus traditional cell-based meat companies, and quality. Does it impact each of those three, or none of those three, or only one of those three? So production time, cost of production, quality of production.
Okay, so in terms of quality, it's definitely much more superior to any other technique for the reasons that we discussed, because it's the natural process that is happening inside the body, and then we are recreating that. We are not trying to mimic any of those processes. We are recreating all of those. In terms of the time, it could be a little bit shorter or longer than the processes that use scaffolding, again, depending on the cell type that we use. Some of the cells can produce more ECM in a shorter time. For some of the cells, it could take a little bit longer. But we do have a lot of other technologies around this core technology for making the process more sustainable and achieve the price parity a lot sooner. And that is also by providing the right environment for the cells. One of the techniques that we have is this system. We used to call it a filter system, but it does a lot more than just filtering. So as you know, when we grow the cells, they produce a lot of toxic elements and they secrete it to the media that we have, and that media becomes toxic. And those are mostly lactic acid and ammonia, which naturally happens in the body as well, but we have the kidneys to just remove them from the blood circulation. We do have a system, a filtration system that can selectively take out lactic acid and ammonia from that system. So we are not creating a toxic environment for the cells, and we can keep the media with the cells for a much longer time. But the system that we have does actually a lot more than that. And what happens is that cells require different elements, for example, different growth factors, glucose and amino acids, and a bunch of other stuff for growing and differentiating, but they require different amounts of each of these, and they consume them at different rates. So what we have done here is that we have identified the elements that cells require much higher concentrations, and we use them at higher rates. For example, glucose is a really good and obvious example here. And the system that we have is constantly releasing those for the cells as well. So basically, by constantly removing the toxic elements from the process, and then providing them with the factors that they have, and keeping the concentrations at a very optimum concentration for the cells, we create a more continuous and more consistent environment for the cells so they can behave more naturally. At the same time, we will require less media, which means less water, so the process is going to be more sustainable. And then because we are using lower concentration of growth factors, it's a lot easier for us to achieve price parity as well. So that is another layer of technology that we have that is helping us with sustainability and achieving price parity and lowering the cost of the process, again, by controlling cellular behavior and cellular environment. There is another technology that we can actually talk about it now because we recently filed for IP for that. And that is something that we call it organ in a chamber. To put it very briefly, we can recreate certain organs that are in charge of producing growth factors in the animal body or the human body, including liver and pancreas tissues. These are naturally producing factors like insulin or hepatocyte growth factors or other growth factors that cells need either for proliferation or differentiation. So what we do is that we can recreate these avatars of those tissues in the lab environment or outside the body of the animal, basically. It's very easy to maintain them. You can give them a very low concentration of certain growth factors, and in return, they are going to produce much higher concentration of a wide variety of different growth factors. And what that means is that we are going to be less dependent on exogenously produced growth factors, like, for example, growth factors that we are producing using fermentation processes. So that is one part of it. We are going to have a process that is more self-sustained and it's cheaper to control the cellular behavior. But there is something even more important here, and that is the fact that when you have the natural tissues producing growth factors, like, for example, if you have liver or if you have pancreas, they are producing different types of growth factors for us. And it's not just the bare minimum that cells need to stay alive and proliferate. So we give the cells, again, a wide variety of different factors that they normally receive in the animal body. And as a result, they are going to behave a lot more naturally. Like, if I can explain it using the scientific terms, there is this effect that I'm borrowing from the field of oncology called Warburg effect. So, and it's very different than what...
Can you either say it a little bit more slowly or spell it or something, because I missed that completely?
Yeah, sure. So it's called a Warburg effect.
Warburg?
Yes.
So like the actor?
Well, I don't know the actor, but probably it's the name of a scientist. It's probably the same.
So let's spell it. Warburg effect.
Warburg. Yes.
All right. Yes. Google comes into being. Okay, great. Warburg effect.
So this is something. Yeah, so I can explain what the effect explains. And this is something that we are borrowing from the field of oncology, but similar effect happens when we work with the cells in vitro, outside the body as well. So Warburg effect says that your cells, when they are in cancer situation, or if you just grow them in vitro lab, in vitro environment where it is very different than the in vivo conditions inside the body, cells are not receiving the right signals and they change their behavior. Specifically in this case, cells require and uptake a lot more glucose and in return produce a lot more lactate. So basically cells are not efficient at all. And this is just because cells are not getting the right signals. And what we do in our processes by using that filtration and release system, as well as producing the growth factors using the organ chamber that we have here, cells are going to get the right signals. They are going to feel like they are in the right microenvironment, and and similar to what they had in physiological conditions. And as a result, they are going to behave more naturally. And by that, I mean they are going to consume less glucose, they are going to produce less lactate, and then at the same time, they are going to produce more ECM and the right type of ECM, because ECM molecules can be different. So by having this organ chamber that I talked about, not only we are going to be less dependent on the exogenous growth factors that we need to rely on fermentation processes to produce them, we are going to guide the cells to more natural behavior and more natural tissue structure as well as biochemistry, not just the structure. So all three of these layers that we talked about, the cell sheet engineering that creates the muscle tissue itself, the filtration and release system that is around that, and then the organ chamber that is going to provide the cells with at least some portion of the growth factors and elements. And let's put it this way, we give them the right kind of signals. So we are giving them the right signaling factors. Eventually, we are going to have a process that is very efficient, it's self-sustained, and it's a lot easier to achieve price parity using the combination of these three systems.
Incredible, just incredible. That's such a good analysis of. I'm literally sort of speechless. I should probably figure out how to speak again so that we can continue the podcast. But I'm going to go back and listen to that multiple times, because it was just a really good summary of just how far you guys have come and what you've managed to accomplish. The question I have for that, as a follow-on for that is, what impact does that have on our ability to ultimately get to a scalable, meat production solution? And has that leapt us forward a year or two or a few years? Or every time I'm asked by anybody about cell-based meat, it's typically is this a 5-year, 10-year horizon? Until we get to a point where we're at a similar price point to traditional meat. Is it ever going to happen? When I hear you talk about the accomplishments and of the Evolve team, I'm just sort of, okay, we are going to get there. That's the first thing, check. I'm still not clear on when, but I've got a feeling that we're getting closer and closer when people like you are working on it. And I've got a feeling my dog's barking at somebody too. So the question becomes, how does this help us? Where what's sorry, I'll cut this bit out and we'll or maybe I won't. I don't know. Are we 5 years? Are we 10 years? I know it's a very unfair question, and I hate it every time somebody asks me. But when I've got somebody like you guys thinking about the very edges of this technology, how long until we're able to move to some scalable solution?
Okay, so I guess both John and I can participate here in answering this question, but I'll go first. First of all, I think what we have done, and full transparency, everything that we have done right now is at a smaller scale and lab scale. And what we are doing right now is to scale up and automate the different aspects of the work that we have. So we are really far from the point that we can mass produce the product. But this process, as I mentioned, is going to allow us to have a process that is a lot easier and cheaper to scale up. And more importantly, I think one of the features is that it allows us to make a product that is much, much thicker. So we are not limited in terms of the size of the cultivated meat that we can produce right now. And the structure is going to be exactly identical to conventional meat, which is really important for consumer acceptance as well. And to prove all of the things that we are actually doing more analysis. Like, for example, we are doing a lot of proteomics, which looks at every single protein that we have in our product and compare it with the actual meat to make sure that not only we have exactly it's the same profile, the ratio of different proteins are also the same, which is really important when it comes to the health aspects of the product. So this is basically making a very good product and making it possible. So this is from my side. I don't know if John wants to add to that.
No, I think that was a good summary. I think the goal for us, like we said, is like hybrids have been tried in the market before. Consumers don't seem like they've accepted them. Like I know Tyson, Purdue, Hormel, Maple Leaf all had blended products. We think that by focusing on 100% animal cell-based products that are fully structured, we can hopefully unlock the market over the next 5 to 10 years. But TBD exactly on timing.
Got it. obviously we've all got the regulatory environment to get through and worry about and so on, and we all will. We'll get there. It's not a if, it's a when. But in terms of, and this is an interesting question I've often sort of thought about when I've had conversations like this. The first step is obviously proving, can we do it? And you guys are proving that, yes, we can do it. And even we can do it so that it's bioidentical, as close as, damn it, to the original, meat that we typically get from a traditional method. So we can do it, and it's right up there in terms of quality and so on. How do we get to the point where we actually take that know-how and that technology and figure out a way to scale it? Is that about just going bigger and bigger step by step, so bigger bioreactors, bigger technology, so that we can prove at each step that it's possible? Or is it okay, we've proven it, now let's go build something at a significant scale and do it at that scale? How do we get there? And I know it's not necessarily something that is front of mind for you guys. How do we go to a meat production facility that is a decade, in a decade in the future? But I'm just wondering, how do we as a group ultimately move in that direction?
Ali and I have obviously been thinking about this a lot and trying to kind of look forward as to what we would need. And I think you really nailed it when you said, what's the stepwise kind of progression? With us, we're really trying to balance between what can you scale out versus what can you scale up, because they both require very different technical proof points. Mm-hmm. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to actually scale out more than up, so that with smaller footprints, we're going to be able to kind of have more geographic coverage. But we don't know that you're actually going to be able to get to those incredibly large facilities for at least over a decade. We know Eat Just is kind of making progress. Upside's making progress. Prolific Machines is another company that's making progress. But we don't actually know what it's going to take to get there yet. And we know even companies like Blue Nalu right now are talking about scaling out for similar reasons that we are, because it's a faster way to kind of get to that proof point. And I think the faster we can get some coverage with smaller deployments will help build the market and the demand. I don't think we're going to need to get to these massive facilities for the next decade.
Interesting. Yeah. So I've had similar discussions with people where some people have said, well, what I actually see happening is not a gigantic facility that produces millions of tons on an annual basis. What I actually envision, and this is not me, this is them talking, what they actually envision is multiple production facilities in different, almost like a regional networked effect, where you can produce this meat product in quantity, so still quantity, but not at those kind of quantities, in many different places where you're kind of more regionally producing. So almost like, instead of having a gigantic animal factory farm, chicken farm somewhere where you've got billions of chickens in one location, you're almost suggesting using cell-based technology in the traditional sort of chicken sense, where you've got lots of little farms and lots of little producers spread throughout the country. Is that sort of the model you're thinking is most likely?
We do, because even if you look at financing the facilities, like debt markets are not going to be open to conventional meat companies right now to build out a full cell scale facility or a cell cultivated meat facility. Like even now, debt markets are only coming on for aquaculture. So if you kind of look at the amount of time it took for those facilities to start, and now that they're able to be kind of financed and underwritten, you're going to have a similar lag here in cultivated meat. And we think that even from the VC and PE end of it, they're only going to finance so many of these facilities up front. So we think you need to have something with a much smaller footprint, even just for the financial side of, if you are going to partner with a traditional meat incumbent, at least it's a smaller footprint, smaller price tag, and something that can be kind of co-financed off their balance sheet as well as your own, without having to kind of take on massive debt that isn't going to be available to you.
Yes, I agree and disagree. So I agree from a PE VC perspective that not many people are going to be writing a $200 million check for a production facility in cell-based in the next 2 or 3 years. I don't see it. Now, maybe that doesn't mean it isn't going to happen. I'm wrong on a daily basis. Ask anybody. But there's another part to the equation, and that's governments. And I see food security becoming much more important in this time of sort of global instability. I'm not saying we're completely globally unstable, but we feel a little bit more unstable today than we did 10 years ago. And certainly from a food security perspective, where we're needing to rely upon our neighbors and our extended neighbors to provide food to us, and sometimes they do, and at the moment sometimes they're sort of equivocating just a little, which is scary for governments. So I think most governments are looking for a way to secure domestic production, domestic supply. So if there's the ability to invest $250 million, for example, and I'm just picking a number out of the air, to produce a far more efficient and sustainable production system, with a large footprint that can provide, 5%, 10%, whatever it might be, a certain decent percentage of the country's protein requirements, I think they would look at it. So I don't know. I think you're right about VC and PE. I'm not disagreeing with you on that. I just think there's another player in this game, and that's governments and regional and federal governments.
I think it's a good point. I think you actually caught one of my biases with that. I was really looking at it from a North American perspective, where like such a large part of GDP is tied to livestock and farming. But they're definitely, from the food security end, I could see governments trying to secure their supply chains. And it was evident even recently with Singapore and Malaysia, when Malaysia decided to stop exporting chickens.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're completely right.
Wow, that doesn't happen very often. I'm gonna that's another piece of this podcast I'm going to play back later. Now let's kind of thank you so much, Ali, John, for taking us through the progress you've been making, and specifically what it means and how important it is. Very, very impressive traction you guys have made, certainly on the science side. Turning to the business side just for a moment. When did you start the company? And I see 2 people on the call. Are there 3, 4, and 5 people, or is it two fellas in a dorm room somewhere? I'm just joking about the dorm room, but Yeah.
No, so the company started actually just over a year ago officially. So September 14th of 2021. It's still primarily Ali and I, and we have one person that assists us part-time. And that was a conscious decision. We wanted to make sure that we had a real trajectory of how to build a strong, big business in this space. And we wanted to make sure that we could tackle the underlying technologies that we would need without exploding our burn rate and not having the time to figure things out. So even now, I think we closed our funding last year. We've only gone through about 25% of the funding to get to this point. And we have 3 new pieces of IP. We've actually found established cultivated meat companies that we're going to start working with now to partner and enable. And I think when we look forward, by analogy, we're really trying to mimic what Perfect Day and Ginkgo Bioworks has done, enabling groups trying to customize our solution for their cells on a services basis and then partner over the long term to take advantage of when products go to market. We think that's going to be a much more sustainable path forward rather than, I guess, a low margin commodity business that needs incredibly high operational efficiency. That we think the market's going to struggle with biotechs that are trying to do that because you're not going to be able to finance your R&D.
So the business model is providing the technology or providing the ingredient, or what's the business model for Evolved?
Providing the technology and customizing it to what the partners need with their existing cells and media.
And who would be your, top 10 ideal customers in the market right now? If every single one of them signed on the dotted line, who would be your top 10 customers?
We're under NDA with the 2 to 3 we're working with, but we think we've identified a couple.
Without talking about existing
Yeah.
relationships, just logos in the marketplace. We can assume that they're not already customers. How's that?
That's fair.
Of the top 10 customers or companies that you would like to be customers, give us a few of those so we can think through, the target you're after.
Sure. We think there's some really interesting companies in the space on the sell side, and we think that they come across 3 different buckets. Obviously, if you look at livestock, those focusing on fish, and then those focusing on milk, all of them are going to require very similar technologies to what we have. So any of the large companies across any of those spaces we think could be ideal customers. There are a couple in Europe that we think are really ideal, a couple in Asia that are really ideal, and maybe 1 in the US. So we've identified who we thought were the top 3 companies across those spaces, have already reached out and have moved to NDA. And actually, Ali's going to be a bit of a traveling scientist soon. Once those visas come in, he's going to work in a few different labs.
Amazing. I see how what you do relates to meat. I didn't really, and I also, I guess to some degree, see how it relates to fish. How would it relate to dairy? Or are there certain aspects of what you kind of the groundbreaking elements you've done? Are there certain elements that are specifically more relevant to dairy than others? Or like I get it from a ECM perspective, now that I'm using the right lingo, for fish and meat. Totally get it. Check. What about dairy? How does what you do relate to dairy?
Okay, so going back to, again, recreating the actual product, something that is identical. If we think about milk, we have the ability to pick the certain elements that we have in the milk, produce them using recombinant production of those proteins or the lipids that we have, and then mixing them with each other. Or we can do it the same way that the animal body is producing it, or even human body for that matter. We can have the epithelial cells, the mammary epithelial cells, create them the right microenvironment, basically recreate the tissue in vitro, and then allow those cells to produce high amounts of milk with the right formulation. And this is where we come in with the techniques that we have. We can recreate, basically we call it avatars of tissues. We can recreate avatars of those tissues and organs and maintain them in lab for a long time in a cheap way so they can do what we want. For muscle cells, it was producing ECM. For milk, it's basically having epithelial cells secreting the milk and then separating it from whatever else we don't want in that system.
Understood. Okay. And if anyone listening is understanding or not understanding, by all means, reach out to John and Alireza for any kind of clarifying questions or whatever. So you've mentioned going back to the business just for a second, that there's 2 of you and somebody sort of supporting. You've only spent 25% of the funds you previously raised about a year or so ago. Totally get that from approving this underlying science and sort of getting the breakthroughs that you're looking for in the science area. Is there a point where you anticipate building the company, or is that not really part of the strategy because it's all about taking the technology and effectively working with the external companies to provide it, license it, or whatever it might be?
So definitely the plan is to grow the team. As of right now, because we've had very targeted risks we've been looking to take out, we've been outsourcing. So for the automation piece, instead of bringing in a mechanical engineer or whoever we would have needed, we've actually outsourced to a large company that does this and has done it for pharma before. Because we really looked at this as just what can we prove to show that we can scale, and then we can kind of build the business around it once we see where we fit in the white space of the market. We also took some pretty big risks early on. Like, we don't work on our own cells. When we took the risk that we thought if we built the enabling technologies around us, we'd be able to partner. And that almost allows you to turn on a whole cell biology team as you're working with these companies while maintaining a very lean process yourself. But we anticipate next year really doubling down on our bio process. We think that in order to have the biggest impact, we really want to get to an industrial scale process as quickly as possible on structuring meat from partners, because at that point, if we can get there, it's always going to cost less money and take less risk for somebody to work with us than it would for them to try to tackle these same problems themselves. So we're really, given that we have that first mover advantage, we're trying to secure the IP in the process now.
Got it. So we have at Big Idea Ventures relationships with corporates, with governments, with academia, etc. Sounds like you're not out there sort of rattling a cup for money. You've still got 75% of what you raised back when because of smart decisions. Thank you for that, by the way. What do you need? What does Evolved Meats need right now, or in the next, let's say, 6 months to go where you want to, to take the business where you want to take it?
It's a great question. I think if we look at the area we're probably going to be most rate limited over time is going to be hiring the right bioprocess people in Canada, just because people don't have the experience that we need. So we've been reaching out to different groups we know to see what we can learn and who we can connect to. But anyone who has that type of experience is probably someone we'd really want to talk to. We've been incredibly fortunate to have a great group of investors that have been supportive of how we've kind of wanted to grow this company to kind of get that long-term sustainable advantage. Mm-hmm. And we've had the opportunity and a lot of inbound interest. So we may actually take on a little bit more money because we've accelerated through our IP development. We actually want to keep pushing the automation side next year and take that to the next step. But the biggest thing would be on the bioprocess side. Anybody, especially if you're able to work in Canada, we'd love to hear from you if you've done any of that.
Are there restrictions? So, I mean, if we found somebody for you great in, I don't know, North Carolina, they wouldn't be able to work in Canada without, well...
There is such a thing as a startup visa that we can look into, and it's something we'd be open to looking into. But yeah, we're also considering like diversifying our work and where we're located, just because we want to obviously succeed.
Got it. Have you thought about another location, having another office, either Singapore, North Carolina, somewhere where you can get more readily available folks?
We have been considering Singapore. Only because it's an early market and we know a lot of companies are going to go there to try to pilot products. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of meet them where they are with our facility. So we've been considering it and we're hoping to have better insight around it by Q1 or Q2 of next year. After these initial pilots with existing partners go through, we can see where we stand, what modifications we need to make on the technology, and then figure out how we can kind of keep pushing on that side so that we can get towards that industrial process.
Got it. So this is one of those podcasts where I actually wish I had another hour to talk to you. If this was Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan, I'd just go on for 3 hours smoking a cigar and not really caring about it, or drinking some tequila. Unfortunately, we don't do it that way here. I'm going to go talk to my manager and see what we can do about that. Any last things to mention about Evolved Meats? Anything you sort of want to tell people, or make sure people know about? Or again, if there's some things you need or anticipate you need, please spend a couple of minutes and go into that. And then I'm afraid we're going to have to say goodbye.
Sure. I guess for us, like I said, we really want to make an impact on the animal agriculture world, and we want to bring forward something that's significantly different than what other companies are doing. So if you want to kind of solve really hard problems and make a big impact on the world, please reach out. And that can either be in the form of talent, investment, or whatever it is. We're more than happy to have conversations and share more information.
Amazing. Alireza?
I guess John covered everything. Thank you for your time.
Okay. All right. So if anyone's listening, hello, Mum. If anyone's listening, please, reach out to John, reach out to Alireza if you've got questions, if you want to help them in some way. I have a lot of these conversations, both on and off camera, both with and without the podcast. These guys are really pushing the envelope and are astounding to me. So you really ought to engage if you're listening to this. All right, everyone, thank you so much. And John, Alireza, thank you. I'm going to press stop record and we're going to say peace out. Thanks for coming along to today's podcast. We really do appreciate it. I hope you found the conversation as interesting as I did. If you have any questions for John, Alireza, or myself, please do reach out to Evolved Meats or reach out to me at Big Idea Ventures. We focus on finding the world's best scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs and helping them to realize their vision and change the world for the better. So reach out to me, reach out to John and Alireza if you have any questions or comments. Aside from that, please do come along next week and participate in the next podcast. Look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.